Legend of War here, and today we're going to be doing a tier list using Tier Maker, this time covering one solely for Medieval 2. I'm going to go through every single faction for every single one of the campaigns for Medieval 2 and rate each faction based on, basically how strong they are. Even the ones that aren't technically playable, I'll still talk a bit about them. So I'm going to include the Grand Campaign. This is basically 5 tier lists all at once. I'm going to include the Grand Campaign, the Britannia Campaign, the Tonic Campaign, the Americas Campaign, and the Crusades Campaign. They'll all have a separate tier list. It's all going to be done in this one video. But before we get into the actual tier list itself, I do need to let you guys know that this video here is sponsored by Manscaped. So you guys know I've been with Manscaped for ages now. Love the product, love working with them. These are high quality products that I stand behind that help to reduce the amount of time that I need looking after my appearance, which means I've got more time to spend doing whatever else I want to be doing, which is usually playing video games. So another thing that I like to use Manscaped for is when it comes to gift giving. With Christmas coming around again, I'm oftentimes in a position where I don't know what to give my siblings for Christmas. And I have in the past, and will be doing again this year, given away the latest performance package. And in this case here, the Performance Package 5.0 Ultra. It's always been something that's been really well received by my siblings. So if you're in a similar position, check out the link in the description and you can get 20% off plus free international shipping. It's a product that I stand behind. So big thanks to Manscaped for sponsoring this video. Okay, with that being said, let's get into the actual tier list itself. Now, it's important to note that these positions are based on campaign gameplay, not based on multiplayer whatsoever. If you disagree with any of these positions, that's totally fine. Feel free to leave a comment explaining exactly why. It might just be due to different playstyles that you value certain things that I don't, or maybe I value certain things that you don't. It's totally fine to disagree. But anyway, let's jump in here and start rating these factions for Medieval 2. So starting with England, I'm going to put England as adequate. Now, England's got a really good roster. Its starting area is reasonably rich. You've got a decent number of rebel settlements that you can capture early on, but you're very far away from the Pope and you're very far away from Crusade targets, which means early on in your campaign, you're going to be fighting Catholics, which means either playing a very passive campaign waiting for your opponent to get excommunicated from attacking you, or just getting excommunicated yourself. And because you've got a long distance if you want to overthrow the Pope, taking control of Christendom can be very difficult to do as England, and your expansion options oftentimes lead to people making a fragmented empire, sending a crusade all the way to Jerusalem, and having a really big distance to capital penalty. So there's a lot of issues with England, but it's overall a very powerful faction that is just stifled by its politics of the area. You can't just immediately go and invade Scotland unless you want to incur a pretty hefty excommunication penalty, which is something that I usually do. I just suck it up and take on whoever I want and try to take out the Pope as quickly as I can, but it does take England quite a while to do that. And France really suffers from the same sort of problem there. Like, being adequate is not a bad position at all. It's just that their internal, well, not internal, their local issues just are not as strong as some of the other guys that are able to project themselves a lot quicker, which the early game is the most important part in any Total War game. And being stifled by any means, especially by the Pope, is going to kneecap your faction a little bit. So when it comes to France, they're surrounded by essentially 4... Everyone's hostile in Medieval 2, so saying that you've got any friendly factions is kind of ridiculous. You can have an alliance with a faction, and then the next turn they just declare war on you. Diplomacy is absolutely balked in this game. Anyway, so you got England to the north, you got the Holy Roman Empire to the east, you've got Milan to the south, you've got the Spanish to the south, all of which are potential enemies. There's a decent number of rebel settlements to get, but a lot of the settlements in France are kind of low tier. France itself is reasonably rich, but if you're not looking to get excommunicated, you might find yourself hamstrung on all borders. Of course, you can just decide to go all out and get excommunicated, but then that's going to stifle you a little bit. It's a fair distance to go to get to the Crusades, closer than what England has to go to, but I think its initial situation is roughly the same sort of difficulty as England. Very good roster though, a lot of variety in there. Typically the base factions, the ones that are available at the start but without having to unlock anything, they've got really good rosters, just that their situation isn't as strong as others, that's all. Then we've got the Holy Roman Empire. Now, the Holy Roman Empire doesn't suffer as heavily as these two from their local problems. So I'm going to put the Holy Roman Empire up as superpower because it starts off with the most amount of territory. It starts off with a kind of a fragmented empire, but in a good way. You've got military force to gobble up all the nearby rebel settlements without pissing off the Pope. But in addition to that, you start off with an army fairly close to the papacy, so you are in a position faster than any other Catholic to overthrow the Pope. And once you've got control of the papacy, then you can decide, where the Crusades are going to go. You can't decide who's going to get excommunicated and who isn't, but you can heavily influence it. Anyone that is at war with you, if you put your Pope in power, or do you just get rid of any Pope that isn't from your faction, which you can do very easily if you capture Rome, then it gives you a lot more control over the rest of Europe. And that's very important if you want to play the world domination game, which it's a total war game. That's typically what you're doing. So Holy Roman Empire has got a lot of sway in that. They've also got a very robust roster really early on in the campaign. They sort of struggle maybe a little bit in the later stages of the campaign, but that's less important than the early stages of the campaign. So Holy Roman Empire is super strong. Then we've got the Spanish. So this faction here doesn't suffer from the problems that these guys have because they've got an enemy to the south that's not Catholic. They don't have to get excommunicated in order to expand. They can go and fight the Moors, which is kind of historically what you're supposed to do, and ignore going after France, and you don't have to go after Portugal if you don't want to. And that way, they're actually in a position to join crusades, especially against the Moors, very early on. So you've got options for expansion earlier in your campaign. So I'm going to put Spain at superpower, because this is a faction that can get very powerful very quickly. It's got a good roster, more versatile, I suppose, than these factions, but less heavy, I suppose. Basically a lighter roster in the early stages of the campaign. Way later on in the campaign, way better gunpowder than most other factions in the game. But I'm not really weighting too heavily on the late game stuff, because in my opinion, the most important stuff is happening in the early game. Then we've got Venice. So I think I'd get pretty heavily criticized if I didn't put Venice under superpower, so I'm going to. And there's a good reason for this. Similar to the Holy Roman Empire, they start very close to the Pope, meaning that you can play the papal politics game and overthrow the Pope if you really want to. They start off with some very rich territory. You've got really good expansion options very early on, a very strong roster. These are the 5 initial playable factions that all have really robust faction rosters. The Venetians have less cavalry though than the others, and cavalry is king in Medieval 2, but they make up for it with loads of high quality infantry and of course just money. Then we've got Milan over here. Milan is basically in a similar position to Venice, just being on the other side of Italy. Rich territory, good expansion options. You can take out the Pope if you want to. Good crusade options because you already start off in the Mediterranean. Same thing with Venice. So Milan is in a very good position to become a superpower very early on, in the player's hands and in the AI's hand for that matter. Then you've got Sicily. So Sicily, I don't think the roster for Sicily is quite as strong as Milan and Venice. However, they start further south in Italy, which in my opinion is better because you're in a better position to go and crusade. In my opinion, playing as the Catholic factions, you want to be able to expand as quickly as possible over stuff that's not going to get you excommunicated. And going down south into Africa and into Jerusalem is very easy and quick for the Sicilians. You got a heavier roster that is not super reliant on missiles, but it's a good roster. So I'm going to put that one under superpower as well. There are some really powerful factions in Medieval 2 that allow you to do a lot, but we're also going to start talking about some of the bad ones now. So then we've got Scotland. Poor Scotland. Crap. Sorry, Scotland. But there is just no redeeming qualities for Scotland. This is arguably the weakest faction in the game. There is another one that I would also argue is perhaps a little bit weaker than Scotland, but Scotland's not in a good position. You start off with only one settlement. Your local rebel options are not particularly good. Your roster is not very good either. And if you really want to expand over England, you're probably going to get excommunicated. And you are pretty much the furthest away from the Pope. Everything about Scotland sucks. So really kind of one of the worst factions in the game. Then we've got the Byzantine Empire. Now, Byzantine Empire is I'm going to get a couple of flack for this one, has a lot of good things going for it. But it's also got a lot of bad things going for it as well. And so it's actually going to go into the bad category. Okay, now just hear me out before you start, disliking the video. You do that if you want to, but hear me out. Not having access to a crusade or jihad is a serious campaign problem for any Orthodox faction. It puts them behind the Catholics and the Muslims by far, because the crusade/jihad option is the most powerful mechanic in the game. Being able to double the movement range of your armies, being able to make them completely free of upkeep, being able to just traverse all over the place really quickly, allows you to project your power like nothing else in the game. And the Byzantine Empire and Russia are incapable of this mechanic. So that immediately disqualifies them from becoming a superpower, really. Now, the Byzantine Empire starts off with a lot of territory, but also starts off with pretty bad enemies. Like, the Turks are coming at you pretty early on. You're fairly close to where the Mongol invasion is going to happen. Not the closest, but if you do play the Byzantines, you are probably going to feel the Mongol invasion fairly early on. You do start off with Constantinople, which is rich, so that's good, but you will not really be able to expand as much as some of these other guys. Now, a benefit to the to the Byzantine Empire is that you don't have to deal with the Pope, but the Pope is a small price to pay for having crusades, and any faction that's Catholic can, without too much effort, take over the papacy. It's not that big of a deal. But there is no scenario that the Byzantine Empire is going to get access to the crusades mechanic at any point in their campaign. So it is always going to put them behind in that regard. So that's why they're going into bad. However, Russia is a big contender for crappest in the game, because Russia, compared to Scotland, they can't use the crusade mechanic, and they also start off with only one territory, and they start off in like the poorest territory in the world, up in like Novgorod. Now, there's one benefit to playing as Russia, in that you have pretty much no enemies in the early stage of the campaign. You will probably have to deal with the Mongols fairly early on, which means that you can have a very calm campaign. Most people just don't even care about your existence. However, getting things going with Russia is a very slow process, because their territory is really far apart. So it takes a long time to get settlements, especially considering you don't have a double speed free army movement that you can use. Their roster is very good. I should have mentioned the roster of the Byzantine Empire. Byzantine roster is amazing. Honestly, maybe I should be putting them at adequate, but really not having crusades, that is a big no-no for me. So that's why they end up in bad. They're borderline adequate, but I can't put them on the same tier as England and France. England and France, in my opinion, are stronger than the Byzantine Empire by a fairly big margin. So that's why I'm going to put it there. Okay, then we have got the Moors. I'm going to put the Moors in adequate, because I personally believe that the Muslim factions is the strongest culture group in the game, because it doesn't have access to the Pope, causing them not to be able to do anything and getting penalties from attacking other same religion factions. However, I'm not a big fan of the roster of the Moors. I don't think it's as strong as the other Muslim factions, and also don't think their star position is particularly good. A lot of people will value Timbuktu because it's got gold, and Moors can get there really quickly. But in all honesty, the amount of time it takes to get to Timbuktu, and the amount of corruption that's there, and also the amount of time it takes to build it up, it's not really as valuable as just having Mediterranean port settlements. Some people just overrate the gold, in my opinion, so it's not that big of a deal. Definitely a strong faction, don't get me wrong. I think that they're good. I just don't think that they can classify themselves as a superpower. Now, when it comes down to the true superpowers, I'm going to put the Turks at the very top. In my opinion, the Turks are the strongest faction in the game, because you are able to project yourself in all directions like no other faction can in this game, because you can go jihad straight from turn one. This is the faction that I've done all my blitzes on, because you're just in a position to do so. There are abundance of cheap mercenaries all over the place. You have a scattered empire ready to be absolutely pounded. You can pound on anyone you want with no repercussions really, and you can just project yourself at a speed that no other faction can compete with. Their roster in the early stage of the campaign is unparalleled. You have so much variety of cavalry that's available to you in terms of just you'll have plenty in your like recruit pool, so you'll never be short of troops needed to advance your empire. It's very easy to just pound the entire planet with the Turks. They are, in my opinion, the strongest faction. Then we've got the Egyptians. Now, I think the Egyptians are definitely a superpower, but I don't think that they're quite as powerful as the Turks. But everything that is good about the Turks, it also applies to the Egyptians. You're in a really good position to go and capture Jerusalem early on. You can start a jihad really early on, get access to southeast Mediterranean. If you want, you can go and invade Italy very early on. You've got a really good roster. I just think that the Turks have just that little bit extra edge over the Egyptians. Okay, then we've got the Danes. Okay, the Danes, I think, are actually bad. I've played as the Danes many times before. Their start position is not very good. So you start off with one region, and it's not a bad region at all, just with Denmark. You don't have that much rebel settlements to go and capture. You're a Catholic faction, so if you go and invade the Holy Roman Empire, you're probably going to get excommunicated. But in my opinion, it's actually got one of the weaker rosters in the game because it's very heavily infantry focused, and the best units in Medieval 2 are going to be any form of cavalry, and the Danes have very limited cavalry in their roster, so that's why I'm putting them in bad. Not in a good position to crusade, not like rich territory to go and occupy. They do take a little while to get going, so I'm going to put them on the same tier as the Byzantine Empire, which in all honesty, it's not too bad, I think. Then we've got Portugal. I think Portugal is a pretty good faction. I'm going to put them under adequate. You're in a similar position to Spain. You start off with less territory and you start off as fragmented empire, which is something I'm not going to value too highly unless you're the Holy Roman Empire and you're actually in a position where it's good for you. You don't really want to be fighting other Catholic factions unless you're okay with getting excommunicated. You can't really overthrow the Pope too easily. But at least you've got Moors to go and pound down with, and you can get a relatively easy alliance with Spain, although it'll be very unreliable. Spain will just declare war on you on a drop of a hat. You never know when it's going to happen. But I think it's a strong roster, pretty similar to Spain's roster, mostly light troops, and that's a good thing in the early stage of the campaign. You want to be mobile, especially if you're going up against the Moors. These are a very fast faction with lots of javelins. You need to make sure you're not bogged down in the mud using just heavy troops. Heavy troops all the time is not the way to go in Medieval 2. Okay, then we've got Poland. So I like Poland's roster. Their roster is really good, but their start position sucks. So I'm going to put it under adequate because at least you have a border with a non-Catholic faction that you can go and invade straight away, that being Russia. But the problem is that territory is garbage. You are fairly close to the border of the map, so it's fairly defensible. Your starting areas is not that rich, but your roster is really good. And one of the best things about Poland is having access really early to, I'm not even going to try to pronounce the unit, but a mounted crossbowman unit really early on. That gives them an edge over all of Western Europe because all their heavy cavalry just get absolutely slaughtered by those units. I think they're called Streltsy. I said I wasn't going to pronounce it, but I think it's Streltsy. But anyway, really good unit that the Polish have. The Holy Roman Empire gets access to it as well. Well, similar unit later down the track, but these get access to it straight away, and that gives them a big advantage. Then we've got Hungary. Hungary is a bit of a dark horse in this race because actually, in my opinion, Hungary is the strongest Catholic faction in the game because its position is exactly what you want. So it's a faction that does not have to go and fight against other Catholics. You're in a position to go and invade the Byzantine Empire straight away. You're in a position where you can join a crusade straight away, so you don't have to get excommunicated by the Pope. You've got one of the best rosters in the Catholic faction. It's very horse archer based, lots of cavalry. You're starting off in relatively rich territory that has access, like I said, to the Byzantine Empire to become super rich early on. So the actual positioning for and roster for Hungary is really what sets it apart from everyone else. They're in a great position to dominate the campaign. And basically, you just go eastward, and if you want to deal with the West, you can do that at any point, just like any other faction. But getting access to Constantinople early on and sacking it will just fill your coffers with gold, especially if you also join a crusade. So Hungary's in a really good position there. Now we've got the non-playable factions. So I'll just talk about them for a little bit before we move on to the expansions. Okay, so let's talk about the Mongols first. Obviously, all of these are non-playable. So super bloody strong faction. You can't play as them in vanilla. Very deadly. These guys here, super just missile-based. Really dangerous. You don't want to go up against this faction, although you're going to have to if you're going to play a long stage of the campaign. If this had a star position at the beginning of the campaign, this would easily be the most powerful faction in the game. Super bloody strong. Similar thing with the Timurids, obviously. They've got access to elephants, which gives them a huge edge. Very dangerous faction, but again, not playable. They show up super late in the campaign. Aztecs, they're not playable, but they're also complete and utter rubbish. They are by far the weakest faction in the game. So if they were playable, they would be a tier below these two. Obviously, we'll talk about them differently when it comes to the actual playable version of the Aztecs, but in vanilla, Aztecs are so easy to slaughter, especially by the time you get there and you've got access to all your technology. I mean, even generals' bodyguards just mow through these guys. They're basically just full of peasants. Even their elite units are super easy to kill. So Aztecs are absolute rubbish. And then you've got the papacy. Now, here's the thing about the papacy. They are actually playable, but I'm going to put it under crap. I've played as the papacy before. You can play as the Pope. I don't recommend it. The mechanics don't work super well. You can actually have bad relations with yourself and not be able to call crusades. So it's borderline not playable, but you can play as the Pope. Also, when you play as the Pope, every Catholic faction fucking just declares war on you all the time because it doesn't recognize that you're the Pope. So it's not supposed to be playable, but you can, but it's not recommended for a reason because it's not a great campaign. Anyway, that's my roster there for the Grand Campaign. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Now, moving on to the Americas Campaign. Bloody ads. Okay, so Americas Campaign. We got Spain, obviously a superpower. Even though their unit scale is lower than pretty much everyone else, you just dominate. Conquistadors are basically unkillable, absolute killing machines. Your faction troops are just so much better than native troops. You are so ridiculously rich, and you just get freebies constantly throughout the campaign. There should be actually another tier above this super duper superpower for Spain. It's just ridiculous how much you can project yourself. It's like, it's not even fair for the other guys that they're playing in the same campaign as you. It's really quite ridiculous. Okay, then the Aztecs. Now, in this particular campaign, I'd say that the Aztecs are adequate. They're, for the native factions, you have a lot of unit variety, which is good because that just means you have constant pools to draw your forces from. You're relatively rich. You start off with a decent, condensed empire. But you got a lot of enemies for sure. But you've got the tools that you need to even overthrow Spain if you are aggressive enough. So I'm going to put that under adequate. Then we've got the Mayans, similar situation. Also consider the Mayan. They're very similar to the Aztecs. They got a lot of low tier crap, and then eventually some high tier infantry. No cavalry available to these two factions, which is a problem for Medieval 2. But the only time that you really need cavalry is when you're going up against Spain, and they don't send that much at you after they get all their bloody cheats. And they do have to fight all the other factions as well, so you might get lucky and they might grind themselves down a little bit. But yeah, you're going to have to fight Spain, which makes these campaigns more difficult than if you were other way around. Then we've got the Apaches. This one's weird because I'm actually going to put this one under superpower because the Apache tribe starts nowhere near Spain. These guys here actually can't develop their settlements beyond villages. However, it is possible for you to learn gunpowder. These guys are very adaptive. So even though you can't expand your settlements very much, and you can't, you don't expand super quickly, you've actually got the most expansive, apart from the Chichimecs who can also do it, which I'm also going to put them under superpower. You've got the... You just got options with your unit roster. They also the only ones that get access to cavalry. But yeah, the Chichimecs, they are also quite adaptive. So they're going under superpower as well. It's hard to put them on the same... You know what? Hang on. I can't put them at the same tier as Spain. No way. what am I thinking? They're just going to get adequate because at the end of the day, their star positions aren't quite as lucrative as these two. What was I thinking? They can't go under superpower. No way. At the very best, they can match them for unit type, but not for unit quality and not for wealth. And they also start off with, fairly dispersed population in this early stage of the campaign. What was I bloody thinking? But they can compete. Then we've got the Tlax clans. These guys here suck. And same things with the Tarascans, they suck. There's no need for a bad category. These guys here, they're like the Aztecs, except just really bad. they don't have as much roster. You can't play as them. They're just not as good. They're just like half of an Aztec faction. That's all there is to it. And then, of course, you've got England and France, which are emergent factions, and they're actually not playable. Both of them are just as powerful as Spain, except they don't get as many cheats. And when they do invade the New World, they don't really start off with that many armies. So if you're playing as any of these guys, you should be ready for them. I usually don't have that much trouble with England and Spain, so I'm going to put them under not playable. But yeah, the Americas campaign is a bit of a weird one. Yeah, what about that? No bad factions. I don't know. It's difficult to rate them because you're dealing with such vast technological differences. Okay, now on to the next one. We're doing the Britannia Campaign. So, England is obviously a superpower in this campaign. You start off with more than half the map to begin with. It is a challenging campaign, however, because you start off in a position where you can crumble if you're not careful, and I've definitely seen it happen. But a aggressive king can really take charge of the situation and absolutely pound down on everyone just really quickly. But you've got to be aggressive. This is not the kind of campaign for you to be passive and just sit around with large garrisons, just sitting around twiddling your thumbs. You've got to put the smack down on Wales straight away. You've got all the resources you need to do it. If you want to abandon Ireland early on, you can totally do that. But yeah, pick an enemy faction and make an example out of them by completely wiping them out. To send everything you've got at them really early on, and that'll also help fix up your financial situation by just basically using your troops and not having as many enemies. Ireland's not that much of a concern. They take a while to get their shit in order. Okay, Barons Alliance, I'll deal with that later. Then we've got Wales. I just think Wales is really a good faction. I'm not going to put it under superpower. Lax Cavalry has really good infantry, really good archers. They're able to basically mass produce troops like crazy, which is really good for factions in Medieval 2. You can replace your casualties really early on because you don't have auto replenishment in Medieval 2 except for General's Bodyguard. This is actually a really good faction, but you really have to be very aggressive early on and take control of Western England if you're going to survive. If you sit around doing nothing, that's not ideal. The fact that they can mass produce their military incentivizes you to be aggressive, and you need to be aggressive. If you're passive, you're not going to do well. Okay, Scotland. I don't think Scotland is very good in the Britannia Campaign. We don't have to deal with any popes in the Britannia Campaign, or actually in any of the kingdom's expansions. So there's no crusade. They do get access to William Wallace, and he just shows up with an army full of troops, lots of Highland nobles, and they're good, don't get me wrong, but Scotland is in a difficult position because it's one of the anti-England factions that also has a secondary enemy in Norway. Norway's primary enemy is Scotland. So they're in a bad position. They're not crap, but they're in a bad position because they've got to fight the English and the Norwegians. And these guys here spawn a lot of armies. And their territory is not super rich. They're in a better position than they were in base game Medieval 2. But it's still not particularly good for them in Britannia Campaign. And then we've got Ireland. I'm going to put Ireland under bad. Their position is not great. They're not rich. They don't have a particularly great roster. It's pretty easy to kick the English out of Ireland. So it's not necessarily a difficult campaign because usually once you've kicked the English out of Ireland, they don't usually come back. But they're just not an overall impressive faction in terms of their roster, the amount of money they've got available to them in Ireland. It needs a lot of developing. And you will probably have to deal with Norway at some point. So I just don't think it's a particularly strong faction compared to the other ones there. Then we've got Norway. Norway is actually crap in Britannia Campaign. They do not start off with very much. You do get some troops coming in for free. But your invasions will take a while to really get movement. And the territory that you're taking out is just not rich. And so you'll oftentimes find yourself broke. And they just don't really have that much going for them. It just takes a while to get things going. You start off at the very north of the part of the map and just taking out small islands for the most part before you're strong enough to put the pound down onto Scotland. I just think that they're sort of the slowest faction to play as in this. And they've got the Barons Alliance, which isn't playable, but it's basically just England whenever they have a revolt. So just put that under there because they are at least part of the game, but they're not playable. But it's just a carbon copy of England. So that's the Britannia Campaign tier list there. Okay, now we move on to the Crusades campaign. Now, in my opinion, this is my favorite of the Kingdoms campaigns. I really like the Crusades one. It's quite good because I think it's the only one that's got access to a Crusade mechanic, but only the Muslims get it. So let's get started rating them. I'm going to put the Kingdom of Jerusalem under adequate because they start off with Jerusalem, which is a really bloody good settlement because it provides a global public order bonus. But you have a lot of enemies. Well, actually, you don't have a lot of enemies. You've got a very powerful enemy in the Turks and the Egyptians, specifically the Egyptians. The way it's supposed to be like aligned up is that the Kingdom of Jerusalem is pitted up against Salahuddin, and the Kingdom of Antioch is going up against Nuruddin. I can't remember. Anyway, the Turkish dude. So you've got an alliance with Antioch, but it will probably not last forever. All of the factions in the Crusades campaign start off very powerful with large armies very early on, and all of them are very strong in different ways. But yeah, not having access to a Crusade mechanic in this particular campaign sets them behind the ones that can. So same sort of thing with the Kingdom of Antioch, the Principality of Antioch. Strong faction, strong starting position, lots of money. You'll get your free units coming in from France, essentially. But they're just not as powerful as some of the other factions available here. Then we've got the Byzantine Empire. Byzantine Empire is actually a superpower in this because you start off with a lot of territory. Even though it's like at the real low point, you're going to have to deal with Venice, but you're in a position where the Turks are just kind of busy. So you're in a really good position to take back a lot of territory. And because the other guys don't have access to the Crusade mechanic and you're not dealing with that much coming from the West, I mean, this invasion force here is not that big of a deal in my opinion. I know it did historically capture Constantinople and basically ruin the Byzantine Empire. However, a prepared player will not really suffer those problems because it only really has one true enemy, which is Venice. That's it. Once that's dealt with, then you're smooth sailing because these guys here are going to be busy with other things for a big part of the campaign. Having a corner of the map where you've got the richest city in the game at the very beginning is very useful. They don't have access to a Crusade mechanic, but their position is a lot easier than these guys. They just don't have as much to deal with. Then we've got the Muslim factions. I'm going to put Egypt as a superpower, because you got access to the jihad mechanic. You can capture Jerusalem super quickly. Their roster is very strong, very good at taking out the slower Western factions. I actually find it a lot easier to play as the Muslim factions than the Christian ones, but it could just be the play styles. But yeah, I think that Salahuddin's faction, Egypt, is more powerful than the Christian ones. And historically, they triumphed over the Christians. I don't want to get into that too much, though. Man, I'm going to get so much crap in the comments. And then we've got the Turks. Turks are superpower as well because you've got access to the jihad mechanic. They do have to deal with the Mongol invasion, but you've got such a huge condensation of territory across the eastern factions, eastern part of the map. Way more so than vanilla, that you really got the tools that you need to deal with it quite easily. And then these two here are not playable. So in terms of the Crusades campaign, I don't think there are any crap factions or bad factions. All 5 of the playable factions are really good to play. They feel good. It's just that, in my opinion, the Byzantine Empire, I'm going to put this in order. I'm going to go... I actually think that Egypt is stronger than the Turks in the Crusades campaign. So, in my opinion, from best to worst, Egypt, Turks, Byzantines, Jerusalem, Antioch, and then the non-playable factions. So Venice just spawns 4 armies and basically knocks on Constantinople's door. You can very easily repel it if you're aware of that it's going to show up, about 30, 40 turns into the campaign. I don't ever have a problem, but that's just me. You let me know if you disagree with that. And then, do we have any more to do? Yep, we've got one more, the Teutonic Campaign. Right. So, let's see here. The Teutonic Order. I'm going to put that under superpower, but I want to stipulate that I think that the Teutonic Campaign is one of the more difficult campaigns in Medieval 2 because everybody hates the Teutonic Order. You've got a mission to basically take out Lithuania, and that can be quite challenging. Lithuania is a very powerful faction, and their roster is very heavy focused. But you've also got the Holy Roman Empire to the west, and they can cause you problems as well. Same thing with Poland, same thing with Denmark. So they're not a well-liked faction, and you've got a lot of tools at your disposal. But a passive player could very easily fall on their own sword, basically, with the Teutonic Campaign. Now, with Lithuania, I also believe that they are a superpower. They're much more cavalry focused, much more light focused. It's the only playable campaign outside of the Americas campaign. We can actually play as a European pagan, so I think that gives it definitely some flavor to it. But they are a very powerful faction if you know what you're doing with skirmisher cavalry. But you do have the option where you can manually convert to Christianity. It doesn't really change your diplomatic standings with the other Catholic factions because just diplomacy in Medieval 2 is rubbish. So switching to Catholicism is something that you can do, but I don't really recommend it because honestly, you get a more unique playstyle maintaining paganism. But like I said, I think they're a superpower. Then we've got Denmark over here. I'm going to put them as adequate, but I should also mention the Kalmar Union. So I'm going to put the Kalmar Union, because it's essentially the same faction. I'm going to put that as superpower. So here's what happens, right? When you're playing as Denmark, you can basically confederate Norway, grab all of their armies, and become the Kalmar Union. So it doesn't really change much about how your faction works. You don't get access to crusades or anything, but just being able to snatch up a few cheap territories and grab a few armies gives it an edge in this particular campaign. They don't have any enemies that really sort of gun for you, except for the Holy Roman Empire. It's the only one that you really have to worry about. You start off with a lot of rich territory. It's a pretty good faction. In my opinion, it's better than it is in the Grand Campaign. And then we've got Novgorod here. Novgorod is... I'm going to put that as adequate as well, because their roster is good. Nobody's using crusades in this campaign, so it doesn't really matter that you can't do it like it does in the Grand Campaign. You've got, like I said, good roster. You start off with rich territory. You've got access to the Adriatic very early on, and you've got your faction borders to the border of the map, which means that there's limited amount of enemy invasions coming at you. So it's a really good position. Borderline superpower, but I think its starting armies are just a little bit weak. You need to sort of build up a little bit first. But I think it's definitely on par with the Danes. Then we've got Poland. I'm going to put Poland as bad because rich territory surrounded by people that hate you. The Mongols are already there to begin with. To your west, you've got the Holy Roman Empire. To the north, you've got Lithuania. This whole situation was essentially caused by Poland, I believe. They invited the Teutonic Order. The Teutonic Order hates you as well, so you just got no friends. You can definitely do it. You got a good roster, but you don't have access to the sea. You do have an edge. Basically, everyone's got an edge to the map except for these two here. But I think that Poland just isn't really as strong as the other ones in this particular campaign. Then we've got Norway. Norway is not supposed to be playable, but you can play as them. So they're garbage. They can't recruit. You have to actually mod them if you want them to be able to recruit anything. It is possible to win the campaign, but you have to bribe Danish units or like rebel units in order to have troops. But you can do it. It's really friggin' difficult. But you can play as Norway. Then we got the Holy Roman Empire, which I think that they are adequate. So these guys here, have a lot of territory. I don't think that they're actually, you know what? I'm going to put them at superpower because they got the edge of the map in this. They don't have to worry about the Pope. Nobody does. So you're rich. You can go north and fight the Danes if you want, or you can fight the Teutonic Order or Poland. So yeah, I think the Holy Roman Empire is in a really good position, actually, in the Teutonic Campaign. And then we've got the Mongols. You can actually play as the Mongols in the Teutonic Campaign because they're there to begin with. I'm going to put them as adequate because there are some mechanics that don't quite work very well for them. That they are playable in the same sense that so is Norway, but you're not supposed to play as them. If I recall correctly, these guys here can't actually recruit priests. They're a Muslim faction, but you don't have access to jihads. Their starting territory is extraordinarily poor, but Mongols have, you could easily argue, the best friggin' units in the entire game, in this particular campaign at least. So that puts them up a fair bit. But if it was just their start position, they'd be total crap. But them just being the Mongols puts them up on an edge just because of how good of fighters they are. And there we go. I think that is all 5 of the tier lists there. We're just going to go through them again. That's the Grand Campaign. We got the Americas Campaign, the Britain Campaign, Crusades Campaign, and the Teutonic Campaign. So that's my opinions. Let me know in the comments below what you think. I appreciate all you guys for all the disasters and stuff lately and all the support for returning to historical. It's been great the past few weeks or even months now that it's been going on, and I really have no intention of stopping at this stage. Anyway, that's the end of this one. Appreciate you guys. Don't forget to check out Manscaped, link in the description and pinned in the comments. Appreciate you, and we'll see you next time. Later, guys.